encourage your soul, enlighten your mind, and empower your faith. This is the Light Network. Conversations about life, Christianity, and culture. Welcome into Four Preachers and a Podcast. We are the three preachers who are your hosts. From Henderson, Tennessee, I'm Robert Hatfield. From Charleston, South Carolina, it's Chance Hicks. Hey, Chance.
Hello. Good to be here.
Good that you are here. And finishing his second breakfast, it's Brad McNutt from Moulton, Alabama. Hey, Brad.
Thank you for letting me swallow my crackers, my peanut butter crackers.
Yes, indeed. And
that can be a challenge sometimes, actually.
Sure. Yeah, it can be. Joining us remote is Hiram Kemp. Hey, Hiram.
Hello.
Okay. Glad you're here, Hiram. There's a little distortion on your voice.
Sorry about that.
Okay. Hiram will be checking in from time to time. Just to see what's going on.
Check your green beans.
That's right, Hiram. So...
Oh, man.
We're glad you're here. I think today we are... I'm just going to go on like that didn't happen.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you suggest I do, Hiram?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. We're in a challenging sayings cycle of our show content. And today we find ourselves in Matthew chapter 6. These challenging sayings have just sort of found themselves in the Sermon on the Mount. Challenging perhaps in the sense of just they challenge us in applying them. It's not necessarily always that they're difficult to understand, though we have waded through some of the deep waters of like, be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect and that sort of stuff. But today, we come to some challenges, maybe in part because there are some cultural disconnects. We're going to talk about fasting here in a bit, but also in part because, Jesus has some stuff to say about what we do in public versus what we do in private and that kind of stuff. So we're talking about private religion today, and we find ourselves in Matthew chapter 6. Is that right, Chance?
That's correct. Yep, we'll spend our time mostly in Matthew 6, verses 1 through 18. And as you mentioned, we've talked about challenging sayings, at least for this season, we've kind of rooted ourselves in the Sermon on the Mount. And it really is, as if you were to just sit down and open up the New Testament, which a lot of people do or plan to do as you get to this time of the year. We're getting to the end of the year. People are thinking about New Year's resolutions and what they'd like to do different in the new year. And one of the things that a lot of people will commit to do is they're going to read through the Bible or read through the New Testament maybe in the next year. And so the first book they're going to go to is Matthew. It's one of the books of the New Testament that gets read most often. And you don't have to get very far into this book before you sit down at the feet of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. And then he will say some things that immediately strike at the heart and immediately challenge where we are. And even if we have been a disciple of Jesus for a decade or 2 decades, to open this passage, to open the Sermon on the Mount, to sit down with Jesus still challenges where we are and where we could be, and challenges us to grow and to develop. And so, as you mentioned, we're in Matthew 6, 1 to 18, and it really is a section that is about private religion. It's built a lot like a section that we talked about in a previous episode back in Matthew chapter 5, where Jesus in verse 20 lays down the principle, except your righteousness exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you won't enter into the kingdom of heaven. And then he gives 6 examples following that. You've heard it's been said, but I say to you, he does that 6 times. And now in Matthew 6, you have a similar structure. Jesus will, in verse 1, lay down a principle for us. Take heed that you don't do your righteousness before men to be seen by them. And then he will give for us 3 specific examples of that. And he'll talk about giving or charitable deeds, the New King James says. He'll talk about praying, and he'll talk about fasting. And he'll say, don't do it this way, but here's what you should do. And the emphasis is on doing things in secret, doing things in privacy to yourself, and not to be seen of men. So let's kind of walk through the passage, I guess, and then we'll maybe ask some questions about it. as we make our way through. Um,
Mhm.
but look at that principle in verse 1. I mean, what stands out to you guys as you think about this overarching principle Jesus lays down there in that first passage?
I see him picking up that theme. You know, you just alluded to this of righteousness. I went through in the Sermon on the Mount in my Bible, and I just highlighted the emphasis on righteousness throughout. Of course, it's included in what we call the Beatitudes and hungering and thirsting for righteousness, and those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, back in Matthew 5, 6, and 10. But as we've said so many times so far in this little series, you know, verse 20 of Matthew 5 is really the thesis of this sermon. And, you know, your righteousness must be better than the leaders of your time. Except your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you'll never enter the kingdom. So we won't be surprised when we come down to verse 33 of Matthew 6 when he says, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. And then, you know, you will receive the promises of your Father, both of a physical nature, I believe in context, but also of a spiritual nature. So the other time here in the sermon that we see it is in this passage, Matthew 6:1, and, you know, contrasting the righteousness, quote unquote, of the scribes and the Pharisees, self-righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, and then leading us toward the kingdom of God and his righteousness down in 33, he says, all right, true righteousness isn't done for the accolades that others might give to you. It's not motivated by the selfish desire for praise. So I think that's sort of where we begin here in verse 1.
Yeah, like I appreciate you highlighting the connection with righteousness here. You know, and really, we're moving from one in Matthew 5:20 towards the other one in Matthew 6:33, and we want to be a people who are hungering and thirsting after the righteousness of God. And so Jesus helps to bring that to real life application of what that looks like here. He uses, you know, the three specific examples. How does what we're reading here, you know, practicing your righteousness, doing your righteousness to be seen by men, how does this, you know, talk about the connection with Matthew 6:33, not Matthew 6:33, Matthew 5:13-16, where Jesus calls us to be salt of the earth and light of the world, where we would be seen. Well, there he says we want to be seen, and here he says we don't want to be seen. So what's the difference? How does that help me understand that in this passage?
Well, I know you understand it, but I will take a shot, because it is something that's quite obvious when you're paying close attention to the sermon, that he says very clearly, you need to be, quote, an example to other people, and at the same time, don't do things in front of other people. And so there is a tension there that we need to try and understand. And I think one of the things is this, that it is possible many times for two people to do the same thing and one be right and one be wrong. For an example, we go out to a restaurant for a meal, and we, as a table, choose to pray. We choose to all stop and you know, it's very evident that what we are doing. Is that right or is it wrong? Well, that depends.
Yep.
And I think that's really what you're dealing with in these texts. There's a tension here. Are we doing it so that people will look at us, or so that we can look down on other people and people will think that we are more religious because we're doing it? Or are we doing it because we are legitimately thankful to God for the fact that we have an abundance of food that so many people in the world do not, and that he has provided for us, and we intend to steward it to the best of our abilities? And so I think that's where the tension exists. Why am I doing it? And, you know, I think the same thing is true if you've ever led in public worship, like especially saying a prayer in public worship. You know, you're thinking about things you want to say, but at the same time, sometimes I need to learn to just forget about everything else and just talk to God, because I'm not there to impress people with the language of my prayer. I'm there to commune with God, and especially lead God's people in a conversation with him.
Mm-hmm.
So those are just my general thoughts of, as with so much of the Sermon on the Mount, it's the disposition of the heart.
Mm-hmm.
Is it really leaning toward and leaning into God, or is it kind of wanting people to lean into us? I think that's the difference.
And bearing in mind, first of all, Jesus made both statements in the same unit.
Right.
And we could argue, has Matthew grouped these things together or whatever, but whatever the case, it seems that these are things that Jesus often stated during his teaching ministry. All right, so 5:16 and 6:1 are in the same context, even though they're divided by chapters for us. And Jesus has differentiated the motivations at the end of 5:16. Give glory to your Father in heaven. But at the in the middle of 6:1 or near the end, he says, you do your righteousness in order to be seen by other people, and he puts a view toward where those things end. And this is a consistent emphasis in this text as well. He sort of started this concept of reward up in 5:46. If you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? But then in 6:1, it's a similar theme, right? I mean, if I'm only practicing sort of the common thought of the time rather than being called to the high standard that God actually has, then what reward am I really working toward? Is it about serving God, or is it about doing whatever the social norms are, whatever people think I ought to do, and securing a reward from our Father in heaven? Jesus does use reward incentives frequently. We interpret those in the ways that we should. We realize that descriptions of heaven are, communicating spiritual realities in physical terms. And so, we can talk about street of gold or gates of pearl or whatever. It's just going to be a beautiful place. But the draw of that is the fact that that's where our Father is.
And Peter stands at that gate, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Peter's there with the book of life, checking everybody off. Please note our sarcasm,
Yes.
dear listeners. But anyway, so look at this. In verse 1, we've got the general principle, dear listeners. Isn't that right, Hiram?
Absolutely.
There he is. Okay. So in verse 1, we've got the principle. You'll have no reward from your Father who's in heaven if you do things just to be seen by men. All right. In verse 2, we've got the example of, giving alms, giving to the needy. At the end of it, truly I say to you, they have received their reward. All right, here's somebody who's doing it for the purpose of being praised by others. Down in verse 5, in the context of prayer, when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites. They like to stand in public so that they may be seen by others, and they have their reward. And then dropping down about fasting in verse 16, they do what they do so that others will see them, and they have their reward. So Jesus has consistently sort of said, here are people who are trying to get something from others rather than putting their trust completely in God and desiring to give the glory to God. And I think that's the difference in Jesus's mind between 5:16, let your light shine, and 6:1, don't do what you do in order to be seen by other people.
Yeah. And even going back to the Beatitudes, right, in Matthew 5:12, Jesus uses that reward terminology at the end of the Beatitudes right before salt and light. In 5:16, he said, this is, you have a reward that is in heaven, and that's great. And here he begins to talk about the lifestyle that is looking toward that reward, and it's about living righteously for God's glory. And then you come to Matthew 6, and the warning is against living righteously for our own glory. And he said, if that's the reward that you're looking for, you're going to get it now, and that's it. There will be nothing else. You'll be paid in full in this life, and there won't be any reward. And so, really, as you're looking at the comparison between these two passages and contrasting them, it comes down to motivation, right? What is motivating your heart to engage in these righteous deeds or these things that would be good works? And I think maybe that's what makes this one of the challenging sayings of Jesus is that motivation is something that is not seen by others. It's something that can be hidden in the heart and masked over. And another one of the terms that is of significance in this passage is the term hypocrites,
Yeah.
where Jesus will say, don't be like the hypocrites, where they're playing pretend, they're wearing a mask. They have been able to mask their motivation and no one else sees it. And that's what makes it so challenging, is that we can do the same thing, right? We can fall into the same trap, and we can walk through the right motions and do the things that we know that we should do with a heart that is completely devoid of the right intention and the right motivation. And so we're reminded, 1 Samuel 16:7, God doesn't see like we see, he sees the heart. And the psalmist would highlight that. The Proverbs writer highlights that it's God who searches the heart and the reins, right? He's the one he's looking internally. He's looking for what's on the inside. And so it's all about motivation in this passage, and doing what we do for God's glory and not for our self-glory, not for our own righteousness, or for the purpose of looking down on or despising others.
Hey, Pennington notes in Sermon on the Mount and Human Flourishing, Jonathan T. Pennington, that this is the way that Jesus in Matthew defines who a hypocrite is. It's not a supposedly religious person who's actually living an immoral life, but it's someone who is indeed righteous in outward behavior, but is doing so with the wrong motives, with the wrong heart. And anyway, I just want to interject that there. There's a challenge there in and of itself.
Absolutely. And I think there's another level to this when I'm thinking about hypocrite stage actors, righteousness. It's something that James, which is, of course, a book that's often paired with the Sermon on the Mount because of their similarities, is the concept of self-deception. Mm-hmm. We can deceive ourselves into thinking that we're doing righteousness, that we're doing right deeds for the right reason. That's what makes it even more challenging of asking myself, why am I doing this? I mean, so for an example, why do I continually drop? Well, when I was getting my PhD, and when I was getting my PhD, and when I was getting my PhD, and when I was getting my PhD, which, by the way, I don't have one, and nor am I getting one. And nor is that against anyone who has one or is getting one.
Right.
But if I'm constantly saying this, is it really that I'm trying to tell a story that was impactful from my time in school, that a teacher made an impression on me? Or is it something where I want you to know, hey, I have a PhD. Mm-hmm. Hey, I'm a this, or I'm a that. And we can make ourselves believe certain things, and we really need to be careful of it. And that's, to me, what makes some of this stuff super scary, is because I can justify it in my own mind as doing it for the right reason, but yet still be deceived.
And this is the challenge that we can't. So what we're talking about means we can't just make sweeping broad statements.
Yeah.
Something is right or something is wrong in the context of our discussion here. So is it right or wrong to have a PhD? Well, there's nothing wrong inherently with having a PhD. Is it right or wrong to display your diploma on your wall? Well, no, I can't. If you were asked to write like, for example, in our world, in preacher circles, we often have to send speaking bios, like if we're going to preach somewhere and somebody's going to introduce us, or they're making a flyer or something. Can I include that on the speaking bio? Well, I don't guess there's anything inherently wrong with that. If I wrote a book, would it be wrong to put my name, PhD? And well, no, I don't. And there's an accomplishment there, in as much as it may be helpful, but like, should I go around insisting everyone refer to me as doctor? I mean, like,
exactly.
And at some point, like, it could get to the point where maybe that is more than just a badge of healthy honor or a good amount of pride in an achievement that's been accomplished, but it becomes a pride like, well, now I'm better than other people. Maybe I need to take the diploma off the wall, I mean, this is just difficult. And this is where this is an uncomfortable area for a lot of Christians where we have to self-discipline. And a lot of Christians are more comfortable with the notion of, I want to discipline you. I want to be able to say, everyone who does X is in sin. We're not saying there aren't those situations, but the examples Jesus is about to give in Matthew 6. And Brad, is it wrong to pray at a restaurant? Well, somebody might say it's never wrong to pray. Oh, but I could pray in a wrong way. Mm-hmm. It's never wrong to fast, but I could do it in a wrong way. It's never wrong to give to someone who's in need, but I could do that in a wrong way. And in an age of social media and things like that, we have to be even more aware of those perceptions and the temptation for glorying in ourselves.
Yeah. I think it's interesting in Matthew's account of the life and ministry of Jesus that this concept really bookends his teaching, right? So Matthew 5 through 7 is the first major section of teaching. And if I remember right, there are 5 major kind of sections of teaching from Jesus in Matthew's account. And the last one, 23 following, where he pronounces the woes against the scribes and the Pharisees. He talks about in Matthew 5, 25, that they're cleansing the outside of the cup, but inside they're full of extortion. The New King James says they're also full of self-indulgence. They're full of self-righteousness. Dropping down to verse 28 of Matthew 23, even so you also outwardly appear righteous to men. And so their goal is an external righteousness before people so that they can be recognized. And Jesus kind of gives that warning at the beginning of his ministry and then again at the end of his ministry in Matthew's account, because I think he's trying to highlight how serious and how potentially dangerous this is for us as his disciples, that we don't fall into this trap. And it's a trap that others can't see us falling into in life necessarily, that only we would know about.
Well, and I think even especially for us in particular on this particular podcast, is he's really talking about Christian leaders, people who are, like the terminology or not, a lot of attention is given to them. I mean, if we're preaching like we are, 30, 40 minutes, 3 times a week, I mean, you're the only person up there. So for us, I mean, it's certainly true for all disciples, but I mean, he's calling scribes and Pharisees, he's calling leaders to the carpet here and saying, and so for people who lead in ministry, it is a very, it should be for us a very sobering thing to think through. So
here's the thing, right?
Something,
receiving the praise of men feels good. It feels good in the moment when it's happening. It feels good after the moment, and so that a feeling, I guess, in a way, can become the high that you pursue instead of pursuing after the glory of God, and so it can derail your heart.
And the irony is, each of the examples that Jesus gives, Matthew 6, 1-5, giving to 1-4, giving to the needy. And then Matthew 6, 4 through 15, prayer. And then Matthew 6, 16 through 18, fasting. The irony is, each of these practices are designed to draw you closer to God. But instead, because of the temptation of pride and hypocrisy, these were things that repelled them from God. It made them more reliant on themselves, which is the exact opposite of what these disciplines are supposed to do. So I think as leaders, what made me think of that, Brad, was the point you made. Like, you would think, well, a preacher, he ought to be among the closest to God, perhaps in the whole church. I think that's a perception of a lot of people. But because of pride and, other potential dangers and pitfalls, like, well, he may or may not be.
And I think that's a book that I know we've all read, that any Christian leader, especially preacher, needs to read, is Paul David Tripp's A Dangerous Calling, where he talks about one of the dangers is you can build the kingdom of God and your own kingdom at the same time.
Wow.
And that is a really, really scary thought. So anyway, this is one of those things where also, we're not just talking to, we're very aware that this text probably hits us in the face harder than anybody else. Or at least we have a lot of susceptibilities to it as well.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's see. Well, what can we put in place then? Let's think about the realm of where we are and ministers minister for a minute. Like, are there some things that we can put into place that will help us be accountable here? That will help us make sure, keep our hearts in check?
I mean, obviously the main one is trying to keep a healthy relationship with God in view of ourselves. And I think keeping a healthy relationship with God, spend time in the presence of God, and if you spend time in the presence of God and you don't realize your flaws, you got a problem. And then I think the people who know us best, listening to them. I mean, there have been times when Brooke, my wife, will say, look, I know what you meant when you said this, but I also know how it could be perceived or taken. And having somebody that can speak into you and say, either A, you stepped over a line, or B, be cautious because it could be perceived in another way. And C, the way you behave in this pulpit needs to mirror the way you behave at home. It's like, I forget the old minister who used to ask who said, if I were asked if a minister were truly a Christian, if he were faithful, I wouldn't ask the members of his church. I'd ask the people who live in his home. Is that legitimately who he is? And so, for me, it's having those people in place, along with the relationship with God that, hopefully I try and keep it in somewhat check.
Yeah. The overarching principle is just cultivating humility and whatever is required in order to do that. If we were to look at all these sections that follow in Matthew 6 as, Jesus has presented the problem in the first half of chapter 6, and now he's going to present the solution. So, I need to really evaluate, like, what are my motivations? Am I really motivated by the good jobs, the notes that people send of encouragement and things like that? And this is hard because I know a lot of well-meaning Christians who feel as though they can never say, I've been praying for you to someone else, because they don't want to violate the section in Matthew 6 about prayer. And, Jesus says, enter your prayer closet. Well, that's not what this is saying, although I appreciate the fact that they want to be careful not to fall into the traps that we're describing here. But, I mean, it's just a matter of my motivation. If my motivation is to encourage another person or let them know that I've been thinking about them and I care for them, there's absolutely nothing wrong with saying, hey, I'm praying for you. Yep. If I could even see, circumstances in which, by the way, I suppose fasting is far less common, in our circles. Maybe there are more people who do it than I realize, and they're just, they don't want to violate Matthew 6. But, does this mean that no one could ever know that I'm fasting? Well, I don't think it would be a violation of that. Jesus says, just don't go around looking all pitiful while you're doing it so that you can garner people's attention. And by the way, understand what fasting is and how that is different from, like, fasting to be on a diet, or fasting because I have to go to the doctor's office and have blood work done later. These are different things. But Jesus challenges us to consider what our motivations are. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also, he says in Matthew 6. Think about how your eye looks and whether your eye is full of light, your attitude toward money, toward generosity, affecting your entire outlook? And then are you caused to be anxious by physical needs to the point that you're not really putting your trust in God and seeking him first? The end there of Matthew chapter 6. And so those things I think can provide almost litmus tests to challenge me and my motivations in the areas that Jesus gives as examples. But remember, these three things, giving to the needy, prayer, and fasting, are not intended to be the only applications of the general principle that he made there in verse 1. Don't do what you do to be seen by others, because if you do that, you don't have a reward from your heavenly Father. So, yeah, cultivating humility and including the people around you who are the closest to you, I mean, that's where it's got to start. And then, like, this is kind of like taming the tongue. You know, like you can't ever let up on this. You can't ever take the leash off. You know, you just always have to be thinking about this and just regularly checking in on it. And that's where maybe a good friend or your spouse can be the Nathan to your David and say, hey, listen, I need to hold the mirror up to you for a minute and show you what's really going on. So,
yep. And I guess a good question to ask is, you know, if no one is seeing me, would I still be doing this? You know,
that's a good point.
And that's, you know, Jesus highlights here, and you mentioned it with the prayer closet, but in verse 3, you know, he says, when you give, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. And it's like, that seems like a near impossibility. Right? You got both hands in there right here. It's like you're gonna stick connected. You're gonna stick one behind your back so it can't see what the other one is doing in front of you. Yeah. But I think this is using here extreme exaggeration for emphasis, right? It's not that your left hand literally can't know what your right hand is doing, and so when the collection basket passes, you can't hold it in one hand because then it would see what you're putting in there unless you hide it in an envelope, right? So he's using exaggeration for the sake of emphasis, because it's not about giving this deed to someone else so that you can say, look at the good I'm doing. It's about doing it because this is for the glory of God, and it's going to benefit their need in the moment. It's going to help them through life. So as you look at this passage, man, what are some ways, you know, Jesus talks about in this passage sounding the trumpet before others or standing in the corners of the streets, right? I don't guess I've ever seen any of us literally sounding a trumpet, or really people standing on the corner of the street to pray in our society and culture. What are the modern day ways of sounding a trumpet or standing on the corner of the street? Like, let's bring those thoughts from Jesus's day and culture to 21st century where you and I live.
Wait a minute. I got to take a picture for Instagram so everybody knows I'm doing this podcast. Sorry. What were you saying?
I mean, I think the most obvious one is social media, and yes, we get the tension or the irony of we're saying that in something that is in ways considered a social media type medium, but you know, it's kind of like, do I really need to check into every hospital that I go visit? Like, do I need to take a picture with every, and I'm not saying the people who do that are wrong. It goes back to the motivations of things. For me, I can't do that. Like taking a picture and say, well, I visited with this person today and it was a great, I know people who do. And I think, I believe with every fiber of my being, they are as sincere as the day is long. They are not trying to point to themselves at all. There are some others that cause me to question. But I think social media is one of the big ones where we can promote ourselves, but there's a danger to that too, right? Like you want to be balanced, because it's like people say, you always put your best foot forward on social media. Well, you don't want to be the person that airs every grievance and dirty laundry either.
Right.
I mean, To me, I think that's one of the big ones, or even letting people. I know of a man who's a little older than us and been very successful in business. And even when to this day, he's not particularly religious, was raised religiously. But even to this day, when he makes donations to programs that will send out social media things, so and so joined this society today by donating this amount of money, he will refuse that offer.
Mm.
He will not let anybody know what he's doing. And part of that is his Christian background. That giving should just be the fact that I believe that I should just help people. And so social media has ways, and I understand why people do it. And it's not wrong to have, I don't believe it's wrong to have your name published if you give a certain amount of money to something or have something named after you, of course. But
sometimes people struggle with this, like for tax benefits. Like I give to a charity, so can I put my name and fill out the address form or whatever, so I get the receipt in the mail and I get a tax benefit? I mean, you make the call on that, but I don't see anything inherently wrong in doing that. But yeah, to your point, I mean, so my name is published in the book or whatever. I mean, it's just like, what's the motivation? I know people who are so concerned about even like the public nature of giving in worship that they do, hey, when I write a check, I fold it. Why do I do that? Well, it's just, in a sense, it's kind of a private thing, but I'm not doing what I do to be seen by men. On the flip side of that, I've also known people who are very open about what they give, but they do it in a humble way, and it's almost like encouraging, if not a little inspiring of me. Like, well, I need to give more. There wasn't anything wrong with people knowing that Barnabas went and sold his land and brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet. But there was something wrong with Ananias and Sapphira, who basically just wanted to cash in on the Barnabas train, right? I mean, that's what they were wanting to do. And I think that's a good illustration of, what we're trying to communicate here. It's impossible to say, okay, here are the rules in which this practice would be right or this practice would be wrong, because it's a matter of your heart. That's it,
Yeah.
And the Christian, like what we're saying, dancing around, is the Christian liberty of how you exercise these things.
That's right.
Like there is one that I even think about here. When it comes to giving, if I'm a person that's waiting on the table, and I haven't done that in years, just I'm not opposed to it.
They don't get the preachers to wait on.
No, we don't get to do that. I don't know if they're worried we're going to be clipping or something, but
making some change. What?
Yeah, I don't know, the money clippers, right? That's what Jesus overturned. But anyway,
that's right.
That tip doesn't fold its jingles.
That's right, Hiram.
That's right. That tip won't fold, little jingle. But anyway,
that was a legit Hiram quote, by the way.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Hashtag focal point 2K21, I think.
Like I think that's right. Yeah.
But like for me, I would be uncomfortable even taking my check. Like if I'm standing up here, the baskets are passed, the prayer is said, and it's time to go. I'm so uncomfortable that I wouldn't even take my check out of my pocket and put it in there so that people could see it.
Wait till you're in the back
of
the room.
I would wait till everything was over and get to the back. That's me.
Right.
Have I seen other people do that? Yes, I've seen them do that. Do I think they were wrong? No.
In fact, I don't really think anything about it when they do it.
It's a difference in personalities and dispositions.
But I'm like you, Brad. I would think about it for myself and be like, yep, I'm going to make sure I'm in the back.
Right. Yep. Something about it just feels strange to me.
Now, the flip side of that is the person who might be tempted to make sure the Benjamin was folded on the outside. And, then you sort of drop it in slowly. It's like a flashcard. I want to make sure everybody sees this before I...
Yeah. I mean, you could fold it in one way so that you're making sure no one sees what you're doing.
Yeah.
Or the flip side of that, you could fold it in a way that you make it very apparent what you're doing. So it falls down to motivation.
Yeah, that's right. But I think, social media, but there are other opportunities. But I think social media is probably our biggest challenge in today. There is a modern term, virtue signaling. which I think it's hard to get a good solid definition on some of these, more modern kind of newer concepts. Cambridge Dictionary says virtue signaling is an attempt to show other people that you are a good person. For example, by expressing opinions that will be acceptable to them, especially on social media, indicating that one has virtue merely by expressing disgust or favor for political ideas or cultural happenings. It is, the concept basically is hypocrisy. It's only doing something to be seen by men, as opposed to espousing these beliefs or doing these actions whether people are around to see them or not. I think that's sort of the modern term for what we're describing here, right? Do you disagree with any of that? I Googled the term because I wanted to find a way to express it in words, and it turns out it's harder to do that than you would think.
Yeah, I also found in looking that term up that there were lots of different kind of definitions and descriptions of it. But I think at the heart, it's you're doing something or saying something to be perceived in the way that you want to be seen, to draw attention to yourself. And so that's the heart of what Jesus is warning against here in Matthew 6. Do you think that this could happen in the area maybe of mentoring, right? That you're bringing someone along with you, and they might perceive that you're doing it for their growth or their development, but you could, I guess, have a heart that's motivated more about, I bring people with me, not for their edification or their equipment, but really just so that they see what I'm doing and then go praise me to my face, or praise others about who I am.
Or just trying to replicate myself, like trying to make them a mini version of me. And that particular is troubling to me. I'm trying to make people I'm trying to reproduce people like me. No, be a whole lot better than that. There are higher levels, but yes, there are so many things, and it could just be we slip in little statements here and there in conversation. The other day I was reading the Bible. Well, that could just be normal conversation.
Yeah.
That could be, hey, I want you to know I'm a religious person.
Yep.
I want you to think well of me because I read my Bible. It's as Robert has said, this goes on and on, that it's hard because it's not, there's no hard and fast rule on it, because two people can do the same thing, one be right and one be wrong. And the difference is the disposition of something that we can't read, we can't see.
Yeah.
And that's their heart.
I think about Paul, who says, well, imitate me as I imitate Jesus. And, Paul was a pretty strong personality. He comes across that way. He would say he's not a good speaker. We might challenge that. Maybe there was some physical thing, that made him feel self-conscious about his public speak, whatever. But, and he's a mentor, and he does good. He even says, like, hey, I'm coming and I'm serving you guys for the gospel to Corinth, but I'm not taking pay from you. And he doesn't do that to virtue signal. He doesn't do that to be a hypocrite. He does it to alert them, and that's the way that they needed to receive instruction in that moment. So, here's this guy who does all these things that we've been talking about, and who is even open about those things. But it's all
talked about his praying,
right,
and his fastings. I think he even mentions in 2 Corinthians 11. So he talks about every single thing that Jesus talks about in Matthew 6 that he highlights as in his ministry, but not for the purpose of drawing attention to himself or being praised, but about God's glory is the heart of Paul. Sorry to interrupt you, Robert.
No, you're right. And if anybody's going to boast, let him boast in Jesus, right? That's what he says.
And even when he does it, like in 2 Corinthians, he's saying, look, I'm talking like a fool. This is ridiculous. Yep. And when he's doing it too, when he's defending, this is the struggle I have. When he's defending himself and putting out these things that he's doing, is he as much defending himself in a personal vendetta as he's defending his ministry and his apostleship?
Yep.
I think that's different than me defending myself personally.
That's right.
So, these are the layers you get into, and there are, they're everywhere. They're everywhere.
Yep. Because we were right, and Robert, I think Robert's the one that mentioned it earlier. Like, it goes much further than giving, praying, fasting. Like, that's the only areas where this principle carries over. Those are the three specific examples Jesus gives, but that's not the end of the list. And so, I mean, you start tacking on anything you want to talk about: visiting, Bible studies, even podcasting, right? Falls into whatever you're doing.
Oh, wait, you
in
you
ministry.
don't podcast?
How many people I've baptized? I mean, like, if you're a preacher, there's a lot going on here. And I don't know, we are four preachers. We are three preachers, but this is four preachers and a podcast. So, I guess we're relating more into preacher culture, but there are similar things like this, shall we say, out in the real world. I mean, even like, I don't know, the kind of vehicle I drive, which tax bracket I'm in, what my salary is. These are things in which I can glory, and, hey, I could use these things to give glory to God, or I can use them to do a host of other things. And, I don't know, even Christians who may get caught up in this could, anyway, I shouldn't have even gone down this road, because the whole thing is just fraught with potential of peril. But at the same time, like, I don't think Jesus mentions any of this to get us to be reclusive about these things. He doesn't say, well, just because there's potential for temptation here, I want you to stop praying or stop giving to the needy or stop fasting. He still assumes that you're continuing in these practices that to some degree will have to involve at least another person, particularly giving to those who are in need. I mean, you're giving to somebody else. He says when you do that, which assumes the practice, but he just challenges the motive. All he's doing is challenging the motive, and that's where we've got to keep it to.
I mean, he's not even saying you can't pray at a street corner.
That's right.
Correct.
Who amongst us has not? I mean, if you've ever been in a big city doing certain things, it's like,
that's right.
Please help me make it across this interstate, But that's a difference between me dropping to my knees and speaking out loud and making a big show. Like, that's the big thing. And even, a lot of people take, in this context, when he gives the model prayer, they take no vain repetitions.
Yeah.
That means you can't repeat yourself. That's not what he means. The emphasis is not on repetition. It's on vain.
Yep. Right.
And which is a selfish motive. I want to, and what's interesting is the prayer is the one he expounds the most, because, and if you think about it, sitting and listening to it, he says, okay, don't be like the Jewish leaders. Don't be like the hypocrites. And then he says, and don't be like the Gentiles. Is there anybody, is there anybody I can look at?
All right, who should I be like?
Exactly. I mean, both of them are using God in a different way, and okay, I'm confused.
And I guess we also have to be careful. I don't know that we've specifically said this. We've said it's personal. We have to be careful judging somebody else. I know people who, if there's an older man, usually it seems to be older men. Although I know some college students too. They may get up and offer in public prayer a long prayer that is extremely thoughtful. And perhaps they have a wide vocabulary such that they use words that I might not typically use. But I can't look at that person and say, well, see, they're being a hypocrite, or those are all vain repetitions, or they want to be known for their many words. Jesus isn't saying all prayers have to be short, and he's not condemning all long prayers. Jesus himself participated in both. How long exactly was the model prayer if you were just to sit down and pray it? It's not that long. Anyway, I just we've got to be careful assigning motives to people as well. And even in the realm of social media, we've picked on social media. That's probably maybe our biggest, the most challenging area where a temptation like what Jesus is addressing may come up. But hey, just because the person checks in to church services every week, that doesn't mean that they're trying to, virtue signal or whatever either.
Yeah. When Jesus warns against long praying, Matthew 23:14, it's not a warning against long praying as much as he says they do this for a pretense, right?
Yeah.
The issue is not that their prayer is lengthy. The issue is that their prayer is for show. Their prayer is for themselves, not for God. And so, you can't judge the motive, the heart of someone who's leading the congregation in prayer, whether it's short or long.
Mm-hmm.
Their heart
And-
is exposed to God, but not to the congregation.
Yeah.
And furthermore, just because their heart may not be right to God with God and what they're saying, I'm still praying with them. So when I pray it, if I'm praying with the proper disposition, it's still legitimate. So
Mhm.
I think what Robert kind of pointed out is important here. What we're talking about is, first of all, there's the challenge of Jesus that says you need to be sure your motives are right when you do things. But I think sometimes as Christians, we have gone to another extreme and said, okay, we're going to judge everybody else's motives.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting that the next chapter he's going to start, hey, let's talk about unjustly condemning people and thinking we can read people perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Think through that some.
Yeah. Boy, the Sermon on the Mount, y'all. What
Man.
about this sermon?
It is a beating and a half. I'm just going to tell you.
That's good stuff.
Yeah.
So good.
Jesus says, take heed.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
But it doesn't just, it may not just be in social media. It could be even in the smaller congregational setting. Like, here's something that we need to be accomplished, and someone volunteers, but not for the purpose of, well, it needs to be done, but because I think that whoever volunteers for this is going to be recognized and praised and exalted. So I'll take that, so it wasn't just reality for Jesus's day. It's a reality for our day too.
Mm-hmm.
And a gut punch and a heart check where Jesus says, you really got to look at the heart. And that's what he's interested in. A heart that's solely focused on him, that wants him to be glorified, and that's willing to walk in his steps. So
We got to get over who gets the glory. We've got to get over doing things just so I get to be the person who writes or makes the announcement, or just so I get to be the person with the microphone, or just so I get to be the person who is perceived to be the leader or in charge. And I think a lot of our congregational ministries are led by people, or have the potential of being led by people who may fit that bill, and as leaders, to Brad's point, this is written with leaders in mind, leaders of any variety, of any kind. You may not perceive yourself to be a huge leader, but if you are in charge of something, an event or a ministry or something, just get over, whether people know every little thing that you do, and instead just do what you do because it's the right thing to do, and because it's something worthy of doing. And that means I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. And sometimes I am going to have to take charge. Sometimes, somebody's got to be the person behind the mic, or the person up in front, or the person sending the emails. And you may receive notoriety and credit or thanks or encouragement because you did that. There's nothing wrong with that. But don't pursue that yourself. It's almost like if you humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, let him lift you up, So yeah, I guess that's what I want to say. Easier said than done. I'll put it that way.
And I will tell you, when you look at the love languages, appreciation, whatever you want to call it, if you are a person like I am, where
That's
words of
point.
affirmation are important to you,
you're doing
that's
great,
a
Brett.
way that you communicate. Oh, thanks. If that's if that's a way that you communicate,
yeah,
you can be very susceptible to some of these things. And it's one of those moments where you wish, you wish that God was still speaking directly, or he would just look at you and you could kind of look at him and he'd go, like, I'm proud of you. You did well. Like,
yeah.
That's what, in ways that would make that easier, I think. But the challenge is we've got to learn not to do it for attaboys and right. Putting back, but be like the people of Matthew 25. When Jesus talks about how they took care of him, they're shocked. They're like, what do you mean? And for a long time I was puzzled by that, but I began to realize that these are people that they didn't think about serving. They didn't even think they were serving as they were serving. It was just so second nature to who they were. They just did it.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't think, oh, well, I served this many people today. It's just who they were.
Yeah.
And when that becomes us, I think that's what God is wanting us to be. And I think that's what Jesus is hitting at here. Just, I want you to be somebody.
Mm-hmm. There's a challenge with that, even as we sit here right now. And I've been, if I'm just being open with everybody, it's just, the three of us sitting here.
And Hiram judging us in the corner.
And Hiram, that's right. So we'll bring him in just so he can be a part of this. But
yes,
if I'm just sitting here talking, like sometimes I wonder, are these podcasts reaching real people? Are they meeting people really where they are? And all that. Are people really listening? I mean, I look at the numbers sometimes to see if people are listening. Frankly, the numbers scare me, and so I try not to look at them very often. And I know at my piece has been, and we've been at this for 10 years. And Brad, you and I have talked about this over and over the last decade plus now. That, like, why are we doing this? Is this the right thing to do? And we want to bring on hosts who want to do it because they believe in the mission, not because they want a platform for themselves. But what you said about words of affirmation. People email us on this. This show garners some of the most listener feedback of any of the ones I've been involved with, and almost always people say, "Hey, you guys are doing a good job." That really does mean a lot, thanks for letting us know that. You say, "Hey, you helped me when you did the episode on." This or that. What constitutes worship? That's one that we've heard a lot of feedback from. The one on prayer, the hard work of Christian prayer. We've heard a lot of feedback from that one too. And, it means a lot that you all said that. And there's a sense in which, like, the three of us, and plus Hiram, I mean, we talk all the time, and we're going to keep talking whether we let you all hear the recordings or not. Mercifully, you don't hear the majority of what we say to one another. But the fact that we can get together and do this, I mean, we're doing this because we want other people to listen, and yet we're doing it not for the sake of you being our listeners, but for the sake of you being mutually encouraged, even as we're trying to encourage you and each other and just help each other to be everybody that God wants us to be and call us to biblical standards and get to the heart of what those standards actually are. But having said all of that, like, I like to think that when you as a listener are kind enough to send a message, to take time out of your day to try and encourage us by your kind words, you are doing something in the spirit of a man like Barnabas, of maybe a woman like a Dorcas or a Tabitha, or a Phoebe, or or like a Mary who hosted the whole church in her house. And inasmuch as you do things like that, there's nothing wrong in you doing them. And there's nothing wrong in me receiving the benefit or the blessing from them, with the understanding that neither of us have done either of those things for the purpose of, you saying nice things to me or me acknowledging your kindness, but instead just to serve each other and to spur each other along in doing something that's good. And anyway, we do, if I'm peeling back the curtain, struggle with that, and we try and keep that in check here on TLN. We've got to. I don't know why I said that. I just wanted to share. Thanks for coming to my therapy session.
Good job, Robert. That was great.
Thank you, Jan.
It's a way of saying his wall of thank you notes is not full enough, and so he just wants more thank you notes.
Okay. I legit have a wall of thank you notes. I do.
Oh, I didn't know this.
I do. I keep it in my closet. So, one could say it's my thank you closet. No. Yeah. I have a pegboard up there, and I peg the notes, the kind notes because in the moments when I feel down, I just go and I don't even read them. I just look at them there, and I'm reminded I'm not in this by myself. Yep. I've printed off some emails and stuck them up there too, because I'm like, hey, you're not alone. Keep going. That's healthy, right? I mean, that's okay.
I don't have honestly, because All my office is covered in bookshelves now. But I have tons of notes that I've received. And you're right. On days when I'm discouraged, I will pick them up. And sometimes I'll just read back through them.
Yeah.
And just,
But
Yep.
it's for the purpose of reigniting a flame that may be sort of going down a little. And all of that is for the purpose of just getting back to it, getting back to serving Jesus. I mean, that's what this is about. And so, I mean, again, I guess we're just giving a personal example of keeping ourselves in check, trying to make sure that we stay humble and doing what we do, not to be seen by men, but for the glory of God.
Yep.
And even taking the criticisms very seriously.
Yeah, absolutely.
That, okay, if this person is being critical, we need to be open to that. We need to see if maybe we're coming across in a way that isn't something we want to communicate, and just taking it all seriously.
Yep.
Yeah, criticism is not fun to receive, but it can be helpful because it gives you an external perspective of who you are and the reality of what's happening and how it is taken in, and it can help you to refine your character. And so, here's an area where we want to encourage each other, and Jesus says, here's an area where we have to be careful. We have to be watchful. And so if we can have people in our lives who help to hold us accountable, it may feel it'll be criticism occasionally in this area, but we've got to be willing to have a heart that is soft enough and malleable enough that we're willing to say, they could be right. Let me think through this and let Jesus work through their words to bring my heart where it needs to be.
Amen.
Any final thoughts on private religion from Matthew 6, 1-18? Or you can keep them private.
Or I guess we could also dub this episode of We Went to Rambling in the last part.
Therapy session.
Exactly.
I just want to encourage people to make sure that you are active in a devotional life, or in private activities relative to the service of God. Don't relegate everything you do to public things, and people don't have to know everything that you do. And I think Jesus here is saying that, it's implied a disciple, a true disciple, is going to do some things that nobody really knows about. And that's okay. That's the way it's supposed to be.
And people may hear about it, but they don't have to hear about it from you, right?
Right.
You don't have to be the one sounding the trumpet. You can just go about your work. And if God wants someone else to sound a trumpet on your behalf for your encouragement or your exaltation, then he'll make sure that gets done.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Four Preachers and a Podcast is brought to you by the Light Network, and we think we've got a nice little family of podcasts that you might want to go and check out. TheLightNetwork.tv is the website, and we mentioned email. I'm hesitant to share the email address today because it seems like it's self-serving. It's kind of like when Paul is writing to the Philippians and saying, hey, thanks for supporting me, but I'm not saying thanks to try and get you to support me more. You know what I'm saying? It's really hard to write a thank you note and communicate gratitude without also saying, keep doing that. Do more of that. If you have questions or comments or criticisms, we do take those seriously. MAIL at thelightnetwork.tv.
Not to be confused with MALE.
That's correct. That's right. I don't know what would happen. If you send email to MALE at thelightnetwork.tv, I think it's just going to bounce back to you.
Probably.
But I should create an email address to MALE and just forward them all to Hiram. I think I may do that.
That M should be capitalized.
Capital M.
Sorry, it's a Jeff Foxworthy skit. It's not like...
I don't know why you would want to subscribe to this show, but if you do...
Who is that?
I don't know. I've heard of him. Freed Hardeman had him. That's the only way first time I'd heard of him.
I don't know why you would want to subscribe to Four Preachers in a Podcast, but if you're so inclined, you can follow us on any of the podcast platforms or on YouTube. Hit the follow us or subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Fridays, that's the day when the new episodes of Four Preachers in a Podcast will release. Thanks for being with us today. You know what to do. Stay cool. See you next time.